4,000 a year, dead, killed by total strangers. It's an epidemic of murder in America. Murder with no motive.
We have people that commit murders like you might go out and cut the lawn. That's about as much thought as they give to it. A term that's been used is recreational murder. If nothing else to do, they go out and kill.
Serial killing, I think it's at epidemic proportions. The types of crimes you're seeing today did not really occur with any known frequency prior to the 50s. An individual taking 10, 12, 15, 25, 35 lives is a relatively new phenomena in the crime picture of the United States.
At the FBI Academy, even experienced lawmen have something to learn about this new phenomenon.
I feel that serial murder is becoming somewhat of an epidemic problem in this country. We're finding that more and more people are involving themselves in this type of crime. Prior to 1950s, we did not see this type of crime in any significance. Today, you can hardly open a newspaper without seeing information concerning a number of crimes that have gone on across the country where people are killing in serial fashion.
It's happened in New York. The Son of Sam killer terrorized the city for months. With a .44 caliber revolver, he shot couples in parked cars. When he was caught, he turned out to be an ordinary-looking postal worker named David Berkowitz. In Atlanta, 2 years of murders of boys and young men ended after the arrest of a soft-spoken businessman named Wayne Williams. The Boston Strangler, who killed 13 women in their homes, turned out to be a married man with 2 kids named Albert DeSalvo. In L.A., the Hillside Strangler, Kenneth Bianchi. They're all normal-looking, all men. They've struck in San Francisco, Florida, Chicago, Atlantic City, Colorado. They are all serial murderers.
Serial murder and mass murder are 2 different phenomena. Mass takes place all at once. An example would be Richard Speck, who killed the 8 nurses. Serial murder takes over a period of days, weeks, months, 1 victim, 2 victims at a time over a period of time. Okay, now this case here is a case of an earlier serial homicide that occurred in Chicago back in the 40s. In this case, you had an individual who killed a woman, and later on it became 3 that he killed, but the first case was such that the killing didn't seem to have any apparent reason. It was a stranger murder. There was no indication that the victim knew her assailant. And in this particular case, the most perplexing thing, of course, that the police encountered was a written message on the wall saying, for heaven's sakes, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. Now, what type of individual takes a human life, strangles, mutilates his victim, does not sexually assault her, does not take anything of monetary value? When one encounters a apparently motiveless crime, or what we call a random or a stranger murder, part of our real ammunition is taken away, because motive is the way we develop cases. If there's no motive, no apparent motive, of course we're left with a good bit of our investigative options taken away from us.
What are these serial murderers like?
Like your next door neighbor. That's another thing that makes it difficult. Most of them are people that you would not suspect.
Take, for example, John Gacy. He was a respected businessman, a minor politician, invited to meet all the right people, including Rosalind Carter. Who would suspect a man who made a hobby of entertaining at children's hospitals, dressed as a clown? But the clown mask hid a homosexual killer who strangled 33 teenage boys. 26 were found buried in his basement. Many had gone to the house to apply for summer jobs with Gacy's construction firm. Another classic case of the man above suspicion, Theodore Bundy. Bundy was a law student in Seattle who campaigned for Governor Dan Evans and worked as a counselor on a crisis hotline. Who would suspect such a man of murdering young women in 4 states? Bundy himself has indignantly maintained his innocence.
There's going to be people turning up in canyons, and there are going to be people being shot in Salt Lake City because the police there aren't willing to accept what I think they know, and they know that I didn't do these things.
How many such killers are out there, still on the loose?
I am absolutely convinced from talking with you people that 35 is a minimum figure.
That's the official estimate from the Justice Department. But we talked with the top crime investigators in the country, and most thought that estimate was much too low.
Well, the figures that are being used at 35, I think, is just tip of the iceberg.
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years.
Can you say how many people might be doing crimes like you were doing?
It would be a guess, but it's not. It's far more than 35. It isn't that impossible in this society. It happens.
Are there more people?
They didn't give up.
How many?
She didn't give up. I did. I came in out of the cold. And what I'm saying is there are some people who prefer it in the cold.
Really, on record in the United States today, we've got dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people who have killed multiply.
Many of the murderers have 10, 15, 20 victims. Some of the more recent ones that we're working with now may have hundreds.
You're looking at hundreds of bodies. They're just laying out there victims of serial murders.
For example, Seattle today. The bodies being found indicate an unknown serial murderer is operating in this area now. It started with 1 corpse floating in the Green River near Seattle's airport. By autumn of 1983, the body count came to 6. That's when we spoke to Major Kraske of the King County Police.
We had 3 that were found during one day, and that was on August 15th, 1982. All found within, I'd say, about a 15-foot radius of each other. They were young women, very young women, and they're all found in the river. And some of them had tattoos on them, which would indicate to us that they were probably mixed up either in prostitution or something in narcotics. As the investigation went on, we discovered that all of them had links to prostitution, and all were seen working in the same area when they were last seen alive. So we knew that we, at that time, had a serial murder on our hands.
The Strip, near Seattle's busy airport. All the victims disappeared from this area. Because they were prostitutes, public outcry was not intense. Major Kraske was cautiously optimistic.
Some of these cases have taken 2 and 3 years or more to eventually solve, but I am optimistic about this.
Will someone else have to be killed before you can solve it?
I certainly hope not.
That was 1983. Since then, many more women have been killed and more bodies found. There are now 29 known victims of the Green River Killer. Another 14 missing women make the likely total of his victims more than 40. With not much physical evidence to go on, the local police turned to a special FBI unit for help with the case. They asked for a psychological profile to characterize the type of man who might do murders in this particular way.
We have used the behavioral sciences unit that the FBI has established at Quantico, Virginia.
Behavioral science, wrestler?
And it has been a tremendous help to at least pinpoint what type of a person we're looking for that would be killing people in this method. But we're looking for an intelligent person, a person that might have animosity against women in some way, or perhaps has a biblical interpretation toward cleansing women, say, such as in baptizing them in the river or whatever.
Those psychological profiles, which often prove to be right on target, are produced by FBI men like Agent Bob Ressler. Ressler is a specialist in the psychology of serial murder. He has talked face-to-face with more multiple murderers than anyone, and he uses that experience to analyze unsolved crimes.
Over the years, I'm talking about probably 20 years of my experience in law enforcement, I've interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of criminals, ranging from everything from petty crimes to major crimes, homicides. I spoke to Manson at length. Sirhan, some of the assassins, David Berkowitz, son of Sam Killer. Give me a specific case to look at. Let me do an assessment of that case, and then I'll tell you what category of person would do that type of crime.
The Behavioral Sciences Unit looks at some of the worst crimes from all over the country. From bits of evidence at the crime scene, the team gets psychological clues to the character of the killer, and even an idea of his history.
I think what we're dealing with here is a serial murderer. The man to commit a crime like this definitely would have had to been involved in crimes in the past, and in all probability will be involved in crimes like this in the future.
The river was just a short distance away, another 175 yards. He could have dumped her into the river. There's a strong current, and at the same time, he just dumped her body really a short distance from that dirt road. Now, this is something I think is going to give us some clues into his personality.
What I'm looking at here is perhaps a guy that doesn't care. He doesn't care if the body's found there. Or,
Exactly.
good point, he wants the
display.
body to be found. He wants it to be found there, and he's taunting the police.
I'm also wondering if our subject is one of these people who's well integrated in society, who may be respected, and who may be not a likely suspect as far as neighbors are concerned.
In the case of many of these individuals, they lead a kind of a secret life, in the sense that they and they alone know what they may be doing, and yet they live a apparently rather normal life when they are not doing the criminal activity.
The person that commits a series of 20 or 30 murders frequently is going to be a very nice guy to talk to deal with, and they're not going to be abnormal.
Most of them are very, very friendly. There's somebody that if you went into a pub to have a drink, you'd sit there and talk to him, and he'd all of a sudden become one of your good friends. You can't look at them and tell that this is something strange about him. They're very normal.
One individual I can think of was described by the prosecutor as being the nicest serial killer he had ever encountered.
Who's that?
Edmund Kemper.
What did people see?
A nice guy.
Did you like Kemper?
I like Kemper.
You were able to appear like an ordinary person, non-threatening to...
I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel and increasingly sick life, other life.
It's difficult when you talk to a person like this to remember sometimes what they've done. And of course their victims, I'm sure, found them just as entertaining and outgoing.
One victim let me back in the car. I locked myself out. She opened the door for me. My gun was under the seat. What in the hell am I doing telling you that? Am I a masochist? Am I looking to be tormented further? I'm trying to show you just how awful this got, how commanding these rages got.
Ed Kemper was a troubled teenager, a child of divorce sent to live with his father's parents. At the age of 15, he murdered his grandmother and grandfather. He was sent to the state mental institution where he responded well to treatment. After 7 years, he was paroled. State psychiatrists pronounced him no longer dangerous, but he was still in the grip of violent fantasies.
I was raging inside. There was just incredible energies, positive and negative, depending on a mood that would trigger one or the other. And outside, I looked troubled at times. Other times I looked moody. Other times perfectly serene. Not very sane. But again, people weren't even aware of what was happening.
It's not unknown for even psychiatrists to be fooled. Dr. Ratner had that experience while treating another violent criminal for the Virginia authorities.
He presented as a very personable, appealing young man, attractive. There were no signs or symptoms of any overt mental illness, and indeed there really never were throughout the time that he was in treatment with me.
And did you file reports on him with the court or state agencies?
I did. I was required to.
Your report said, though, that he was doing pretty well.
Yes.
And what was he actually doing at this time?
Well, I believe it was during the last 6 or 7 months that I was seeing him that he was involved in the catastrophic criminal activity that for which he was eventually convicted. This involves the rape and murder of 6 or 7 young women.
In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear while hitchhiking. 2 of the victims were picked up from the campus of the University of California at Santa Cruz. That's where Ed Kemper's mother was working as an administrative assistant.
You were involved in the campus because your mother worked there?
Yes. I was also involved in killing co-eds because my mother was associated with college work, college co-eds, women, and had had a very strong and violently outspoken position on men for much of my upbringing. My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure.
The rage usually stems from the fact that the individual, though he may be an adult, remains extremely dependent upon the mother and resents the dependency a great deal. Unfortunately, when you are dependent upon somebody, you cannot risk taking out your anger against that person, because there's always the possibility that the person will reject you or abandon you. So one possible solution is to express the rage against a substitute figure.
I hate to distill it down into such into one-word realities like that. There's a lot that leads into that happening, but that is what happened. They represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her, and I was destroying it.
The dynamic has so much to do with the feeling of a woman controlling, and perhaps by virtue of that control, emasculating these individuals. This is a feeling of, this is revenge against a feeling of emasculation.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. I knew absolutely nothing about that whole area, even if just sitting down and talking with a young lady. I need to be able to really communicate, and ironically enough, that's why I began picking people up. And I'm picking up young women, and I'm going a little bit farther each time. It's a daring kind of a thing. At first there wasn't a gun. I'm driving along. We go to a vulnerable place where there aren't people watching, where I could act out, and I say, no, I can't. And then a gun is in the car, hidden. And this craving, this awful, raging, eating feeling inside. I could feel it consuming my insides, this fantastic passion. It was overwhelming me. It was like drugs. It was like alcohol. A little isn't enough. At first it is. And as you adjust to that, psychologically and physically, you take more and more and more. It's the same process. So it finally came down to the thing of, do I dare bring this gun out? Already realizing if that gun comes out, something has to happen. It was going to happen. I didn't see it then, but it was going to happen. I was playing a dangerous game with a loaded gun that got us all.
On one occasion, Kemper picked up 2 roommates in Berkeley.
In that first killing in May of '72, when that gun was pulled out, I launched it out. I had it under my leg, out of sight, parallel to my leg in the seat. It was something that had been thought out in fantasy, acted out, felt out hundreds of times. before it ever happened.
Kemper drove them at gunpoint to a secluded area near a park. He took one of them into the woods, leaving the second girl tied in the car.
I just gone through a horrible experience with her roommate stabbing her. And I was in shock because of that. I couldn't believe that it was that way. And I'm walking back there bewildered. I gotta kill her. I can't let her go. She's gonna tell on me. Everybody's gonna get me. She sees the blood on my hands. What are you doing? And she pulled back and she gasped. And I think, whoa, I don't want her to know what happened. I said, your friend got smart with me. She'd been getting really smart with me a lot, but I never hit her. I killed her, but I didn't hit her. I said, your friend got smart with me and I hit her. I think I broke her nose. You better come help. She's about to die. Why does she have to know that? I couldn't deal with telling her that. And when I attacked her, she didn't at first realize what was happening. It didn't go through. She had very heavy coveralls on. It knocked her right up into the lid of the car, but it didn't pierce the clothing. So it wasn't that swell a knife anyway. I went out and bought a pawn shop, huge knife. And I kept on just mindlessly attacking. She falls back into the trunk. I just killed a young woman. I slammed down the lid of the trunk. She isn't dead, she's dying. And I panicked. I thought, I just locked the car keys because I can't find them in my pocket. Oh my God, I locked them in the trunk. I'm kicking on the trunk lid and yanking on it. Oh no, I don't believe this. I started to run and I tripped over the gun that I'd had in my pants that I had totally forgotten was there. I stopped. I said, stop and think. I collected my wits. Check all your pockets. I picked the gun up. I stuck it back in my pants, now remembering I had one. I checked all my pockets, and there's the keys in the back pocket. I never put them in my back pocket.
Everyone makes mistakes, and that's what we have to hope for. The more mistakes they make, the better their chances.
I thought I was pretty slick, and went and tripped all over myself. That first 2 murders, the first 24 hours, there were 3 clear times I should have been busted, and I wasn't. Because 3 different individuals or 3 different groups of people got scared and minded their own business and looked the other way.
Some of the people who are committing murders, even as we speak, if they're doing it by themselves and they tell no one about it, they could go on undetected until they decided to stop. And the police wouldn't catch them unless we just happened to roll up on them while they were doing it.
Even after police warnings against hitchhiking and an increased bus schedule on the campus, Kemper had no trouble picking up hitchhikers. Ironically, one warning advised riding only in cars with university stickers. Kemper's car had such a sticker.
They like to think that they're good at what they do, and they may never get caught.
I have seen cases where I believe that that person never would have wanted to be caught and never would be caught if he had his way. I've had one individual tell me if he were released from jail after killing a dozen people, he would never be caught again because now he knows how to do things a little bit better.
It was getting easier to do. I was getting better at it. I was getting less detectable. I started flaunting that invisibility.
And all this time, Kemper was able to seem normal. He even hung out at a bar across the street from the courthouse, making friends with policemen, trying to pick up information.
They'd buy me a beer, I'd buy them a beer. Casual relationships, but I was poking around a little bit trying to find some things out. I knew they wouldn't be privy to hot information, but there were some things that were bothering me, like were there any speculations on how they were dying.
Did the cops like you?
Like I said, a friendly nuisance. I got in the way, and it was deliberate. Again, friendly nuisances are dismissed.
How did you get the knowledge to outsmart the police?
Watching television, believe it or not. Joseph Wambaugh, police story. Got some tremendous insights into not just the gimmicks, the actual things, the tidbits that you would pick up from their procedures, but the mechanics behind that, the logic behind it, was I would not allow myself to walk into even a potential trap of behavior. And one of those was talking about those crimes too much to people, initiating conversations about that.
There was a memorial service for 2 of the victims.
Yes.
Were you tempted to go?
Yes.
But
I'd seen one too many episodes of one too many crime shows where that is one of the available resources for clues. Tracking down the attenders, one man taking pictures of the people there to eliminate as potential suspects.
some police department, now they actually came to your house to pick up a handgun.
Sheriff's representatives. One of the detectives was upset because he heard I had a .44 Magnum pistol and was a convicted mental patient and killer. He came to take the gun away, and it was on he and his sergeant detective. They were staking out the wrong house. It was across the street, and I'm playing around with the car, standing next to the gun in the trunk. They come over and ask me about, excuse me, sir, do you know who lives in this house across the street here? Well, that house was 609 Harriet. You cross back over to this side into 609 Ord, and they were looking for me and didn't even know that, see what I mean? Bad news. Well, at any rate, we walk into the house to have them ask my mother about this other house, and I'm saying, hey, which 609 are you looking for? And they said, are you Ed Kemper? Yes. And it goes on. And I needed to find out what they were looking for, the murder weapon, the .22 automatic, or the .44 Magnum, and I don't want to advertise that I've got a whole bunch of guns. So I made a comment to divine between the two. And I said, yes, quite a little gun, isn't it? And he retorted, a .44 Magnum, I hope so. And I said, whew, okay, because that loaded .22 was under the front seat and guaranteed me an arrest right on the spot. And .44 was in the trunk. I forgot that. I took him in the house, we went into my bedroom, and the closet doors open, and I have a high-powered rifle with a scope on it.
You had some other stuff in the house too, yes?
Yeah. I had the personal effects and identification of the last two co-eds that had been murdered about 2 months before, right next to the guns in the closet, in a box.
Could he have seen it?
No, but when he arrested me for having all those guns and went through the rest of the closet looking to see if there were any pistols or anything else, he couldn't have helped notice a purse, a book bag, and co-ed ID inside of those belonging to their two latest murder victims. I'd back up and said, oh, excuse me. I just remembered something. And instantly he responds to what I'm saying. My hand moves. Back we go outside, and he's still thinking, boy, this is a really nice and helpful guy here.
Some of these people do what you and I do to become better killers. They practice their trade.
Didn't Kemper stop himself toward the end of his career?
Kemper says he did. He says he could have gone on. He said he had fantasies of killing dozens more people, of leaving a trail of bodies across the country, and at one point he just got on the telephone and turned himself in. He said it was time for the killing to stop. In his case, he said publicly that it was his mother that he was killing all along, and when he killed his mother, that was the end. It's a very deep psychological observation from himself. It may be very accurate.
It was springtime. It was April. And for 2 months I hadn't killed. And I said, it's not going to happen to any more girls. It's got to stay between me and my mother, and it's got to, I can't get away from her. We're still fighting. She's still belittling me. I'm like a puppet on a string, and I entertain her. She knows all my buttons, and I dance like a puppet with that pain. And it had even gotten physical, to where I had physically grabbed her and thrown her onto her bed, trying to emphasize a point that I was threatening to kill her. So here I pick up these two young ladies in Berkeley on Ashby Avenue. One has flowers in her hand, petite little dolls. They're in granny dresses, and they're hitchhiking, a couple of real experts. I want to see how together I am, if I can resist this temptation.
You going to Walnut Creek? Great.
And they get in my car. They want to go one way. I know they need to go the other. If they go the way they're insisting on, we're headed right back out to where the first two co-eds were murdered. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, all I got to do is relax, and they'll take me to their death. I've got the gun in the car, the same one I've been doing it with. I insisted. As gently as I could, I took them where they needed to go, to their college.
Thanks a lot.
That was 1 week before I murdered my mother. I said, she's got to die, and I've got to die, or or girls like that are going to die. And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that, came out, I walked up to her bed, she's laying there reading a paperback, as many thousands of nights before. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Shit. And I looked at her, I said, "No." I said, "Good night." And I knew I was going to kill her, you know? And I was so cold, it's so hard. And that's the first time in 10 years I've looked at it that way. I mean, that intensely, that honestly. It hurts. Because I'm not a lizard, I'm not from under a rock. I came out of her vagina, see? I came out of my mother. And in a rage, I went right back in. For 7 years, she said, I haven't had sex with a man because of you, my murderous son. This is one of our arguments. A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up. And what's her closing words? I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk. God, I wish I had.
Your grandmother and her daughter-in-law, your mother, were 2 women very important in your life, and you killed them both. Could you say what they were like that led them to the same fate?
Same thing that kept them from ever being friends. They were both aggressive, matriarchal women. They'd been the daughters of strong matriarchal women. I still loved my mother, and it's hard for somebody to comprehend that you murder your mother through love. It isn't a rational process. It's a very painful process. It isn't rational, and I've got to still live with that.
Why did you wind up giving yourself up?
It had to stop. It had to stop. Once my mother was dead, there's almost a cathartic process at that point. I got physically ill right then, when she died, when I murdered her. And once she was dead, there was no way I could back out. I had backed down from giving up 1,000 times. You know, I used to get drunk and go sit out in front of the sheriff's department in a parking lot across the street on one of those old concrete parking berms, and I just sit there and say, no, I still can't. The clanging doors, I could still hear them. No, because it'll never open again. You know, so I rationalized that to give up would be insane. To give up would be crazy. I'd be giving away my freedom, and I don't need to. But I look back on that and wish I had earlier, when I was saying those things to myself. The people who were later dead wouldn't be. The regret that came later would have not had to be. Those people, not things, those people would still be with their families, with their loved ones. They would have their own families if I had had the courage to make that decision instead of painting myself into the corner.
Where might you be if you'd never given in to the impulse to murder?
Where might I be? If my parole had been successful, I believe I'd be married, I'd have children, I'd be heading toward my first grandchildren.
Washington State is the home of the parents of Susan Rancourt. In 1974, she was a freshman at the state campus in Ellensburg. One evening, Susan stopped to help a man with a cast on his arm carry some books to his car. She was never seen alive again.
Well, first of all, it was unexpected because those things don't happen to you. They happen to everybody else. You read about them in the paper. They happen in New York City. They don't happen in Ellensburg, Washington. Well, we received a phone call from the university that my daughter was missing, that she hadn't come home. She was a straight-A student, the type of child who just wouldn't normally do those kinds of things. For her not to come home from a meeting was just not right. She just wouldn't do that kind of thing. She just wouldn't.
She was easily frightened, by stories of things happening to other young girls.
Other young girls were also missing, from Seattle and from other campuses. Young and pretty girls, all with long hair, parted in the middle. They looked like each other, but no one realized a serial murderer was at work.
No one paid any attention to it. It was just written off as a runaway. The interesting thing is that if you look at the state of Washington, there had been 12, 14 of these occurrences in a 6-month period.
I don't think anyone, correlated all these missing girls until we bought an ad in the paper. Help us find our daughter. We know something has happened.
Ted Bundy is the man who eventually came under suspicion for these crimes. He became famous nationwide because he was such an unlikely murder suspect. He was handsome and intelligent, a young Republican, a volunteer aide to Governor Dan Evans. He answered the hotline in a crisis center. He was attractive to women, and he was attending law school. He seemed to be the all-American boy.
I was lieutenant in charge of homicide at the time that we first became aware of Bundy. This was 1974. It was in July of 1974. We had 2 victims that were taken out of a local state park, Lake Sammamish State Park, both the same day. It was the least place that you would ever expect a killer to be roaming to pick up his victims, especially 2 within the same day and about 3 hours apart.
According to eyewitness accounts, here's what happened that day. A man was seen to approach several women at the beach. He was handsome, well-dressed, and had his arm in a sling. Several witnesses heard him introduce himself as Ted. He asked for help moving a sailboat, just as the man in Ellensburg needed help with his books. It seemed natural enough to give him a hand.
The witnesses at Lake Sammamish State Park provided information regarding the size of the suspect, the actions of the suspect, the mental temperament of the suspect, through their eyes. They had the idea that he was very smooth talking, that he was exceptionally intelligent, that he was not a sloppy talker, that he was not a sloppy dresser, that he was very polished, that he was good looking in their eyes. Most of the women that were approached, you might say that they were intrigued by the offer. What happens after that initial confrontation is something they can't predict, and it's something that we cannot, as law enforcement people, protect against. His behavior blends in with the behavior of every other citizen in society. And it's not until he gets him in what he calls his comfort zone that he can actually do what he wants to do. And they're helpless at that point because he has them right where he wants them. And they are more or less in a situation they cannot get out of.
As human beings, I think we tend to be too open-armed and too trusting. And we allow people to get close to us, get us at a disadvantage, and then if someone wants to do you harm, you're theirs.
Well, a good-looking young man, a good talker, one thing and another, had a broken arm, supposedly, needed some assistance. There'd be no reason really not to help.
No.
And I think that if you were to take 1,000 young people under similar circumstances, probably 950 of them would do the very same thing.
Do you say to someone, don't be helpful?
Well, I think it's a value judgment. It's a situation where one has to make certain decisions.
Is there something you might have wanted to say to her that might have helped her to handle this?
No. You couldn't say or do any more than we did, I don't think.
For a long time, that bothered me. I thought perhaps something in our training, could have helped her in that situation, but I wouldn't have wanted her any other way.
And I think that you have to have a society that says that you can conduct yourself in this fashion and feel reasonably safe.
Denise Nasland was one of the 2 women abducted from the lake. This is Denise's mother.
All I can think about is what he did to her, what were her thoughts, how long did she suffer. And those thoughts are with me all the time. She left for the picnic with her friends, and about 9 o'clock that night, I saw that her boyfriend came up pulling in her car. And I knew right then there was something wrong. And he said, "I can't find Denise." He said the picnic was over with for a couple of hours, and he had been looking all over for her and couldn't find her. I knew that Denise just would not disappear like that for any reason at all.
Within about 2 days, we had the media coming to us asking what was going on, and at the time, it was the position of the department that, considering the circumstances, the crowd, and with the lifestyles at that time, that this wasn't too unusual. But later on, it proved to be very unusual, and that's when we got involved in all of the other missing women cases at that time.
At this point, no bodies had turned up anywhere. No one knew for sure what had happened to the missing girls, except for Ted.
And the evidence that we had initially found on our bodies was almost non-existent, which is typically characteristic for these type of people, is that you don't find very much evidence that attracts to any one suspect. It kind of sounds morbid to say this, but we were hoping for another body with more evidence on it than what we could produce from the ones we had. And I think if he would have remained here, that we would have eventually caught him.
Do you have any doubt that he is guilty of all the crimes?
Not of the ones we suspect him of. I don't have any doubt about it whatsoever.
I think that there's no question in my mind that he did it, except I need to have him tell me that.
Are you convinced that the case is solved now? Do you know who killed her?
I feel I do.
Are you satisfied?
In one way, I'm satisfied, but another way, I tell myself and pray that he would confess.
In 1974, Bundy changed law schools and moved to Utah. Similar murders began to happen there. 2 girls who looked a lot like the ones in Washington disappeared within 3 weeks of each other. One was seen at this pizza place with a friend, but when she left, she never reached home. Her body was found 9 days later. She had been beaten and strangled with a stocking. The other girl left a high school play to pick up her brother at a skating rink. She never reached her car. Her body has never been found. That same day, another young woman was kidnapped, but she escaped. She jumped from a car at a stop sign with handcuffs hanging from one wrist. In 1975, Ted Bundy was picked out of a police lineup by that woman and convicted the next year on a charge of kidnapping. In 1977, Bundy was extradited to Colorado, where he had often visited. He was put on trial for the murder of a young woman abducted from a ski resort. While getting ready to direct his own defense at the trial, he gave this rare interview to 2 reporters from station KUTV, Salt Lake City.
Are you angry? Sure, I get angry. I get very, very angry and indignant. I don't like being locked up for something I didn't do, and I don't like my liberty taken away, and I don't like being treated like an animal, and I don't like people walking around and ogling me like I'm some sort of weirdo, because I'm not.
You think about getting out of here?
Well, legally, sure.
A few weeks after this interview, Ted Bundy escaped, jumping from a courthouse window. After a few days in the mountains, he was captured again, and his trial continued. In his Colorado prison, Bundy began to lose a lot of weight. The reason became clear on New Year's Day, 1978. Bundy had climbed into a ventilating duct and escaped again. This time, he left the state at once and began to travel across the country.
Serial murders are as hard to solve as any other murder, but they're complicated by the fact that you're working with several jurisdictions.
Communication between law enforcement is not good. It's bad enough within the states, and then when you start talking about communicating with another state, it's almost non-existent.
We've got 17,513 police agencies in the United States. You've got 3,000 counties. That adds to the problem.
We'll not know that in another jurisdiction, maybe even 3 or 4 counties down the road, that there's a similar crime that's occurred.
We discovered there's a lot of jurisdictional disputes between local law enforcement people. It's my case and I'll take care of it.
It's my information and I'll keep it.
No correlation of all material between different agencies, states, cities, counties.
Did this meet your image of what you expected if you had to call the police?
It was a little frustrating.
Well, it was terribly frustrating. We were frustrated totally to begin with, and of course anything less than perfect superhuman effort we would have been frustrated at.
In 1983, a case came up that may show just how many jurisdictions and how many lives can be involved in a single series of murders. This man, 47-year-old Henry Lee Lucas, claims to have killed 360 people in 35 states. A lot of his victims were young hitchhikers.
We got too many girls out there hitchhiking that shouldn't be out there. And the average girl is going to do what a man says when he gets in the car.
Lucas's sometime partner, Otis Toole, was involved in some of the killings. Together, the two may have killed close to 400 men, women, and children. Many of those murders have been verified. Some of them took place in Harris County, Texas, where Grace Osmer is lieutenant in charge of homicide. Lucas showed her the sites of some of his murders.
We put him in the car, and we said, okay, Henry, show us where we need to go. And we'd be driving down the freeway, and he'd say, here, turn off here. There's a park over here. And so we'd go over into the park, and we got within, I would say, 50 yards as to where one of the bodies was found. And he went into detail as to what he did to the girl. Later on that evening, we went back to the office, showed him various pictures of women, and he picked the girl out immediately and said, yep, that's the girl I did in the park. I asked him that what he did, you know, and when he'd abduct one of them, did he talk to them, did he know their names? And he said he never asked for names, but some of them would give their names. But he said he would immediately forget it because he did not want to know who they were. Talking to him, he showed no remorse on his victims. Some were shot, some were stabbed, some were beaten, some strangled, some were mutilated, some were not. They had no set pattern. And I think this is one reason that we were having such a hard time putting them together.
But was there one thing that they did always do?
Yes, the victims were sexually assaulted after death.
Because why after death?
They could not have any relationship with the live victim.
Roaming murderers like Lucas create enormous problems for the police.
They would be in our state, or whatever it takes to drive through Texas, which was a good 8 hours. They could do 2 in Texas and be in Arizona or New Mexico and do one again in 10 hours and then go from there to California and do them. So they're very hard to track.
We're talking about people who can put 250,000 miles a year on cars, can go from Newport News, Virginia to Jacksonville, Florida overnight and kill all along the way.
Those sorts of numbers have shocked the police into looking at new ways of keeping track of serial murderers. The Justice Department is funding a new clearinghouse for reports of violent crime. Descriptions of victims, bodies, and crime scenes from all over the country will be channeled into one computerized system. That's called VICAP, an acronym for Violent Criminal Apprehension Program.
It's an idea of Pierce Brooks, a long-time investigator, formerly with Los Angeles Police Department.
VICAP won't stop the murders, all of them, but it is certainly going to be a preventative program that will stop many murders and really save a lot of lives. And to me, that is the ultimate goal of VICAP, is to save lives.
To employ every available means, including computer analysis, crime scene analysis, forensic investigative aspects, cooperation between federal, state, and local police, all this together is really what VICAP is supposed to be, and specifically on crimes against the person, rapes, homicides, child disappearances, things of this nature.
And this would assist police agencies through a national center to be able to know if there's any like crimes in other jurisdictions. And the purpose of this center would be to connect up the police agencies involved.
If the project works as I envision it, there will be trained people in the field around the country that will be able to go to a homicide location and to work with the local police who are investigating that crime to get the necessary information to submit to an assessment center.
It's going to be a lot easier to find it on that screen by having 15 reports reduced to what, 15 lines there, rather than have to read through 15 comprehensive reports.
The idea of registering details of crime on a central computer has been in use for stolen guns and cars for 2 decades. Only now is it beginning to be applied to crimes against people. Thousands of complex cases a year will have to be entered into this system. And the computer will simply make all the facts available. The meanings of the reports will still have to be figured out by crime analysts.
I gave it to you, now you tell me what to do with it. Pick a spot.
They're hoping the computer will help them save some of the lives lost to serial murderers.
We've got things that are represented out of 3 states, and they all look alike. Now, I'm not sure they're all...
Maybe accidentally we stepped into something, and this is, honest to God, real.
I've had the experience where I've sat an investigator down, not expecting to find anything at all, run an inquiry for him, and have him go, jackpot, jump up, run out the door.
Suppose you had this when the Ted Bundy case was current. How would you have used it? Would it have helped?
Well, for one thing, we would have known sooner that Utah and Colorado had similar murders. We didn't know that to start with.
A pooling of information, I think, would have helped save the lives of other girls. And I think if they had followed through on some of their instincts and some of the evidence that they did have earlier, I think they could have stopped a lot.
And if you could save one life, if there were 11 girls instead of 12 in the state of Washington, it would have been well worth the effort.
We would have cut Bundy off at the pass right in Utah. As soon as he had killed the girls in the Northwest and then moved to Utah. And all of a sudden they stopped in the Northwest. But then they started in Utah. If there had been a VICAP, that information would have been collected, collated, analyzed, and both those agencies would have known about the tremendous and great similarities, and he would have been stopped in the past. So some of the young ladies in Utah, the women in Colorado, and the girls at the college at Florida State would be alive today, including the little 13-year-old would probably be very a happy young bride someplace instead of moldering in a grave somewhere.
Bundy surfaced again in Tallahassee, Florida, staying in a rooming house near the Florida State campus, and hanging out at a local disco near the Chi Omega sorority house. In the middle of the night of January 14, 1978, he entered that house and went from room to room. He bludgeoned and assaulted 4 of the sleeping women, killing 2 of them. He also beat another woman that night, and later abducted and killed a 12-year-old girl. On February 15, 1978, Bundy was stopped in Pensacola for a license check and resisted arrest. Even though he was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, he was not recognized. He eventually had to tell his captors his name several times before they realized who they had. Bundy helped to conduct his own defense.
Good morning, officer. Good morning.
You testified here this morning that you recall arriving at the Omega House approximately 3:26 a.m.
Yes, sir.
And you were approaching the house as he was entering the house?
We went up the walk, yes, sir, together. There was a considerable amount of blood around her head, matted in her hair.
How good a lawyer was he?
Not a very good lawyer. I think he would have been a good lawyer for other people, but he was a terrible lawyer for himself.
2 bits of evidence did him in. Incredibly, a matchup between a cast of Bundy's teeth and bite marks on the buttocks of one of the victims. And testimony from an eyewitness who was coming in from a date as Bundy was leaving Chi Omega.
Do you recall the man that you saw at the door of the Chi Omega house on the morning of January 15, 1978?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is that man in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Would you point him out for us, please? Describe his clothing for us, please.
The dark pinstripe suit with the red tie.
Okay. Let the record reflect that she has identified the defendant. No further questions, Your Honor.
Bundy was found guilty and sentenced to death.
A jury of your peers having you found count 2 of the indictment, murder in the first degree upon one Margaret Bowman. This court adjudges you guilty.
But even the judge found him impressive and charming.
You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity to you. I want you to know that. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Court will be in recess.
Bundy is currently appealing all verdicts. He is on Florida's death row.
I think I stand about as much chance of dying in front of a firing squad or in a gas chamber as you do being killed on a plane flight home. Let's hope you don't. But
so you don't lie awake at night thinking about it?
Not a moment. Honest to God, not a moment.
If he's brutally murdering all these people, why should he go on living when everyone else has lost their daughters? I mean, that doesn't bring them back, true. And it probably doesn't give you a lot of peace of mind or satisfaction, but at least you know he's gone and someone else isn't going to lose their daughter.
You believe Ted Bundy killed your daughter?
I do. I believe that with all my heart. I feel it. And I really think he's a psychopath, and I think that he will murder another girl, and I think the death penalty is a deterrent, and I'm very pleased that that jury had enough guts to recommend it.
Do you have any feelings for Bundy's parents?
Well, I feel sorry for them in a way, and then in another way, I feel that they should have seen something in his eyes or something somewhere about him to give them a clue that something was wrong.
I've said from the very beginning that somewhere there was a mother with a hurt deeper than mine. And I'd rather have my daughter than that son.
I've been told that, you know, the parents of these girls are fairly decent people. I don't know. And I really feel for them because apparently they've suffered an incredible tragedy in their lives. The loss of a loved one is probably the most extreme kind of loss you can suffer in this life. And I say I feel as much for them as anybody can.
I feel that my life has been completely destroyed.
Why did he do it? Why did he pick on her? She would have been his friend if he had given her a chance.
These serial killers, these people that are victimizing women and children, have never had a satisfactory relationship with hardly any person in their life. If you look at them from early childhood, I think you'll see that they've learned to manipulate people, systems, institutions to get their way in life. They're really into self-gratification to the point where they set aside everybody else's rights so that they can be gratified. They are sane under law. They're not insane. They know what they did. They know why they did it.
Is there any defense against these guys? I'm speaking to potential victims.
I don't think so at this particular point. These people are just walking into a parking lot. They're walking down the street, going between one dormitory to another. They've never had contacts with the perpetrator, who just moments before were coming from a class, going shopping, and they're just brutally picked up off the street.
In a sense, they're right that there's no defense if, in fact, this person has locked in on a victim and that victim is had. To say that there's no defense from the standpoint of prevention would be wrong. There are a lot of things people can do to take themselves away from being vulnerable to this type of individual.
Even with someone as charming and clever as Bundy, there were people who got away from him. My friend's daughter got away from him because she had been taught not to get in the car with strangers. So just a general understanding that you should protect yourself will help minimize your chances.
Do you have any words for victims, potential victims?
Well, all I would have to say is be aware of where you are, who's around you, what's going on. If you walk out into a parking lot and it's a dark parking lot, look around to see if anyone else is near you.
Don't hitchhike. I would not hitchhike. I would not let anybody I know hitchhike with anybody. One individual told me the minute a hitchhiker puts his hand on my doorknob to get in, he has just handed me his life.
If young people are going to hitchhike, I think they ought to be aware of just how chancy that is. Anybody would say, I'm not going to play Russian roulette. It's crazy. It's throwing your life away.
I wouldn't advise any child or any woman or any man to go anywhere with any person who identifies himself as a police officer or a security guard, unless in fact that guy is, has the uniform that we recognize, has a police car right out in front with radios, has a badge and a credential that you read and verify as being authentic. And still, if you don't believe him, I would check. I'd say, well, you're here for this and that. I'd like to call your department and verify your status.
If you're driving down the street and a car tries to pull you over, even if a law enforcement officer tries to pull you over in a market, you have a doubt that it is not a police officer, pull into a service station where there's lights, then get out. Sure, the officer probably say, why didn't you stop when I told you? But if you sit and explain it to him, he'll understand and there won't be any hard feelings.
When you look at some of the localities that these people have been taken from, there's no way in the world, unless you had wall-to-wall police officers, to stop some of it. So the only way you're going to stop it is if it starts, that you put a halt to it as quickly as possible.
Theodore Bundy, convicted of 3 murders, Florida, death sentence, under appeal. John Wayne Gacy, guilty, 33 murders, Illinois, death sentence, under appeal. David Berkowitz, guilty, 6 murders, New York, life sentence, no parole. Henry Lee Lucas, convicted of 10 murders, Texas, death sentence. Edmund Kemper, guilty, 8 murders, California, life sentence, parole possible.
If there's somebody out there that is watching this and hasn't done that, hasn't killed people, and wants to, and rages inside, and struggles with that feeling, or is so sure they have it under control, they need to talk to somebody about it. Trust somebody enough to sit down and talk about something that isn't a crime. Thinking that way isn't a crime. Doing it isn't just a crime, it's a horrible thing. It doesn't know when to quit, and it can't be stopped easily once it starts.